Hello and welcome to this episode of Crime Lines and Consequences. This episode is a little different than our usual format. Eric and I had done a live show at the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival. We decided to marry the two topics and cover psychic Sylvia Browne and her work in missing persons cases. Thanks to Eric, we have a pretty good recording of the live show, so we wanted to go ahead and publish that here for you. And then we'll be back in 2 weeks with an episode with our friends from LA Not So Confidential, where we're going to talk about incels. So if you're listening to this, hit subscribe or follow, depending on your platform, so you don't miss any of our episodes. And with that, enjoy the show.
Thank you guys for not rushing off to dinner and coming and sitting down with us, and hopefully we'll have an enjoyable time here.
Yeah, as soon as I saw our time slot, I'm like, everyone's going to be at dinner. Okay, we'll just record by ourselves. But luckily, we don't have to.
So I'm Eric Carter-Lundeen.
And I'm Charlie Worrell.
And this is Crime Lines and Consequences.
And this is where we play our theme music.
Yeah, I'm not gonna sing it this time. So welcome to True Crime Podcast Festival. We're super excited to have you here as we talk through this. Get friendly, sit by people you don't know. There is an open row here, so if you want to sit up here, that will work as well. All right. I think we're just going to jump into it, right?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and just get started.
So before we get started, by a show of hands, how many of you know who Sylvia Browne is? Oh, good. Okay, some of you may be too young.
Yeah.
Today we're going to strip away some of the shine around Sylvia.
So I'm going to have to admit that I have to claim her as one of my own because Sylvia Browne was born in the greatest city on earth, which we all know is Kansas City, Missouri.
Do we know that?
We do.
Okay.
Lars, right? Okay, we got a vote of one. So she was born Sylvia Shoemaker in Kansas City, and much of her documented history is self-reported, meaning it's wholly unreliable. So we're not really going to focus too much on her biography, since that is not what we come to a True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival for.
But because we are at the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival, I am totally into spooky shit. Yeah, I do have my own paranormal show. I'm here for that. What I'm not here for is some of the stuff that Sylvia did to the lives of grieving families. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the spooky shit, which is what I love. Sylvia claimed in her memoir that she came from a long line of psychics dating back 300 years. Sometimes it skipped a generation, but luckily for her, she was able to be one of those that were gifted with that, along with her mother. And her grandmother, Ada, is actually the one that passed it down genetically, yes?
However it works.
Yeah. Her first psychic prediction, according to her, was when she was 3 years old. She predicted that she would have a sister when she was 6 years old. Her sister was born just a month before her 6th birthday, so she is obviously a psychic.
Case closed. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Have a good night. Follow us on social media.
Like and subscribe.
She also said that she told her family when her grandfather died before they had been informed, so she knew ahead of time, and that she had predicted the deaths of 2 great-grandparents, along with seeing spirits in her bedroom at night. She claims to have developed the ability to sense illness and sickness, making it difficult for her to be in large groups until she learned how to filter these feelings so that she didn't feel them all the time. Because her grandmother, Ada, had the gift, then she gave Sylvia the tools to deal with it.
And like I said, this is all self-reported by Sylvia, and I think the benefit, or maybe for us, drawback of her writing her memoir in her 70s was that most of the people who could confirm or deny the things she said had already died. At the time she wrote her memoir, her sister was still alive, but her sister was on her payroll. Again, there's incentive to build up the myth of Sylvia Browne. So Sylvia got married a couple of times. She had some kids. She got divorced a bunch of times. And then she was working as a teacher in California when she decided to become a psychic full-time. At first, it was like a party trick she did for people. Her husband at the time, Doll Brown, is the one who encouraged her to do this. And that was in part, according to this fantasy, that her psychic abilities is what brought them together. She did a reading for him before they were married. He fact, was married to someone else and predicted that he would divorce his wife and marry a tall redhead. Now, when she's sitting and she's next to Montel, who's 6'2", she may look small, but she was 5'8". And her blonde hair is a dye job. Her natural hair is red.
Pro tip for all you single people out there. Just tell your date that you're psychic and you see yourself with that person in the future, and then you will be. Just try it, see if it works. It did work for Sylvia. With Dal's support, she quit teaching and did readings and lectures full time. She made a lot of money using hypnotism for people, and specifically for people who wanted to lose weight or quit smoking. She made a defense for charging people for her services or her gifts. She said that most jobs are people putting their talents to work for them, and as long as she worked for God's greatest good, then she had nothing to feel sorry for. There's that. And I guess the fact that God's greatest good made her lots of money was just a bonus.
Yeah, the only reason we know who Sylvia Browne is because she took this to the TV circuit, and she offered a service that ended up getting her a spot in the news. She would do a de-ghosting service for anyone who moved into a house that happened to be haunted. And that got her some TV time. When I was reading her memoir, I was literally thinking, now I know why she did that. She is a good storyteller. She's a good writer. She had a personality, especially if you watch her older stuff before she got really big. You can see why people got sucked into it. And the viewers liked it. Therefore, the news liked it. Mm-hmm. So they would bring her in to do other things. She got a news crew to follow her to Alcatraz so she can convince some mobster, the ghost of a mobster, to leave, to cross over, which he did not do, according to Sylvia. So if you go to Alcatraz, you will be haunted. She also visited a haunted Toys R Us to explain something about it being haunted. That was another TV show. She ended up getting more mainstream when she went, Leonard Nimoy had that show, In Search Of. She was on that. And then, of course, she was on Unsolved Mysteries. Mm-hmm. So this, bringing up Unsolved Mysteries, brings a lot of us to true crime. Anyone here? Unsolved Mysteries, the gateway? Yeah, there's Robin Warner. So this is going to bring us to the true crime part. Sylvia Browne used her television notoriety to then beef up her resume, and she started claiming that she worked with the FBI to solve cases. Not only that, but she testified in these cases. She was an FBI expert. However, the Skeptical Inquirer, FOIA, requested her name to the FBI, and all they got back that had anything to do with her was when she was being investigated for fraud. She never testified for the FBI, and she never worked with them. But this information didn't come out until after her death. I want us to remember that the families who were talking to her had no way to fact check whether or not she was telling the truth. And they went to her in earnest.
Mm-hmm. She started appearing on the Montel Williams show, which was really what led her to becoming, I'm going to air quote this again, America's best known psychic. That's the air quote. Sylvia was a major fixture on the show. She was on there all the time, eventually making weekly appearances. So she really started to build a following. She would do readings for the audience, and often they were for people without a public presence so that she couldn't search the internet or whatever. We can fact check to make sure that any of that was true or not, which, spoiler alert,
So I have to ask, does anybody have a grandpa whose name started with the letter W? I'm getting a male presence on this side with the letter W. Is that anybody over here?
No.
No, okay. I'm not Sylvia Browne.
Maybe it's an M. Maybe it's an M.
Maybe it's an M. I may have it inverted. That's what she did. She guessed and then she read people.
And she was always wrong.
She was really wrong. And honestly, when she's literally just talking to somebody about your grandpa wants you to know that he's proud of you, you can say, really, what's the harm? But that's not who she was working with. She was, but they would also bring on the families of missing or murdered people to get a psychic reading from her. And that's not the time to screw around and play games or play psychic with people. And yet that's exactly what happened.
And it's really disgusting from my perspective as a family member who's out there fighting for justice and trying to advocate, to know that there are people out there actively trying to prey on the vulnerability of somebody who's just trying to find their loved one or just trying to get justice for them. It just is one of the most vile things I think that anybody could do. And we want to make sure we're citing our sources here. We're using findings from a skeptical inquirer who looked at the 25 cases that Sylvia made pretty strange predictions on that have since been resolved. Sylvia claimed that she had an 85% accuracy rate. What do you guys think her actual rate was? 3?
So if you think about it, even if we just gave her that she had to guess whether they were missing and alive or missing and dead, she would have had a 50-50 chance of being right.
Actually, it was 0%. She was wrong on all 25 cases.
But I do want to be fair and point out those are only the cases with resolution. All the ones that haven't had resolution, she may have been 100% right on all of those. You do not know, Eric.
Right. We don't know. We don't really have time to get into all 25 cases, though, Charlie.
Yes.
So we're just going to grab a sampling. Let's start with Opal Joe Jennings.
In March of 1999, 6-year-old Opal Joe Jennings was playing outside. She was playing with a 2-year-old cousin and then a 4-year-old friend. So the witnesses to what happened are very young. She was in a lot that was next to her grandparents' house. So the kids were playing, and according to the 4-year-old, a man pulled up in a car. He said hello to them. Then he suddenly grabbed Opal, hit her in the chest, and threw her into his car and took off. After Opal went missing, her grandmother went on the Montel show to ask Sylvia what happened, and Sylvia told her, as she is literally crying, that Opal was still alive. But wait till you hear what she said happened. She had been kidnapped and sold into slavery in Japan and was in a place either called Kukuro or Kukura. But we do have these witnesses, and this 4-year-old, amazing witness because they're 4, was able to give enough of a rough description of the man and the car, and they were detailed enough. They were released to the public, and a tip came in, and a man named Richard Frank confessed that he picked Opal up, he took her to the store, but then he left her there alive and well. They would eventually convict him of kidnapping. But they did find her. They found her in 2003. Horseback riders were going through an area and found her remains. Based on the evidence, she likely died shortly after she was abducted, certainly not having traveled to Japan.
Sylvia Browne gave that family false hope that their daughter was still alive, their granddaughter was still alive. But imagine what they were picturing if they did believe that she had been sold into some type of slavery. That must have been the worst thing possible that you could tell somebody who's looking for their loved one. Like, why would you go there?
To think about what she was going through, and that's what they were living with.
And this isn't the only family that Sylvia told that their loved ones were sold into slavery. In 1999, 9-year-old Erica Baker disappeared while out walking her dog. Sylvia told her family that she was alive, and similar to Opal, she was also sold, but not to Japan. This time, she was still in her home in the state of Michigan, but she had been sold for drugs, and a, quote, black woman was involved. In 2005, Christian Gabriel confessed to having been driving drunk when he hit Erica and killed her. He panicked, put her in the back of his van, and left her body at a park. Her remains have never been recovered.
So it's very likely or possible that you've not heard of Erica Baker or Opal Jennings, but there is another case that Sylvia weighed in on that made national news, and that's the 2001 disappearance of Chandra Levy. And that really made the news because at the time, she was working with and having an alleged affair with Gary Condit, who was a U.S. representative.
To be fair, Sylvia she was far from the only psychic that was trying to make a name for themselves. With this national headline story, she wasn't really the only one.
Right. She definitely wasn't a standout. Anytime a case hits the news big,
Right.
You're going to have people who are going to try to get their 15 minutes. And a lot of them, including Sylvia, said that Chandra Levy's body would be found in a wooded area. It was widely known and widely reported that they were searching a wooded area the entire time because her computer search was searching for running trails in a certain park near her home. The police actually had searched the area and they came very close to her body on one of the early searches, but because it was slightly unorganized and there was some confusion on their grid search, they didn't find it. everyone was basically having psychic visions of what the police already knew. And Sylvia would then, when Chandra was found, call this a success because she predicted she'd be found in a wooded area, except she said she would be found in a wooded, marshy area. And marshes are very famously flat so that the water can accumulate, and Chandra's body was found on an embankment in a non-marshy area. So she claims it was a success, but the only part she got right was the part that everybody already knew.
And if we're being fair, we could give her half credit for that. But I don't think so.
I think we're good. No, I'm not feeling generous today.
This isn't the only case that Sylvia publicized as correct that we know is not true. The case is technically in the unresolved category, but it illustrates the actual risk of these readings, which the next story gets pretty dark.
Yeah, just fair warning, this one gets bad.
In 1997, Erica Frazier was 17 years old. One October night, she was out driving, and seemingly she just vanished off the face of the earth. Her car was found parked between two hay bales in a field, and with her purse and all of its contents were still inside, so nobody took anything. Her keys were gone, though. Her mother went on Montel less than a year later to ask Sylvia for a reading.
And so again, we just have to think about how desperate these families are at this point, and they're putting their trauma out there on national TV, and that's something as podcasters, when we're handling a case, we have to be mindful of. We are putting someone's most vulnerable moments out there, and I know Eric knows firsthand the impact when you trust someone with your story and either they don't necessarily relay it the right way, or their listeners or viewers decide to take a harsh judgment.
It's certainly not an easy thing to deal with, and it's not anything that anybody really wants. Nobody wants to go out there and talk about the worst thing that's happened to them over and over again. But I do relate to the desperation of needing answers and needing progress to happen in the case. I don't fault the family for seeking that, but I do fault Sylvia for being somewhat of a predator to take advantage of that. When Sylvia did the reading for Erica's mother, she told her that Erica was dead and murdered by someone who was, at the time, in jail. That they could find her in the water, is what she said. And when asked if anyone had information about the murder who could tell them more, Sylvia said someone named Chris. The Montel show silenced the name but kept the camera on Sylvia, and you could pretty much just read her lips and tell what she was saying. Erica did know someone named Chris, though, her ex-boyfriend, and the day after the episode aired, he killed his girlfriend and himself in a murder-suicide. The Montel show and Sylvia literally put this murder-suicide out as evidence or proof that Chris must have been involved in Erica's death.
Yeah, so they took this second tragedy and turned that into a hurrah moment for Sylvia Browne. And Chris's family tried to sue Montel over it when they did that, but legally, you cannot defame the dead. And so there were no consequences. It didn't go anywhere. But Sylvia then repeats the story in her memoir, again, exploiting this family to say that this was a sign of her success. And she does change the names. She don't want to get sued at this point, but it's pretty obvious with the facts that we know which case she was talking about. And the court documents and the police statements don't back up her or Montel on this assertion that Chris had any knowledge or anything to do with the disappearance. And honestly, Sylvia never said he did. She just said he knew something. But she's saying, oh, I named him as the killer, and then look what he did. The police have said that he had a solid alibi, and they're not even sure that he saw the episode that was aired, and that the incidents may be completely unrelated. And this is just an incident that has been exploited.
Yeah, and the Montel show never again showed her, Sylvia giving a name after this. So they would bleep out the name and then they would pan the camera away from her so that this couldn't happen again. And Sylvia claimed to have felt bad for Chris's family, but never really backed down from her assertion that he knew something. And that leads us to the other claim of success that she has in her memoir, which was, in my opinion, complete bullshit.
And
complete bullshit.
We're stealing Josh's branding over here.
Don't sue me, Josh.
He's got to trademark that. So this is a case I actually did not know until I read her memoir, and it's a case of Michelle O'Keefe, and she was tragically murdered in a mall parking lot at the age of 18. Sylvia said in her psychic reading that a man wearing a uniform, like a security guard, was responsible. And some reports online say that she did give a name, and the name she gave was Lee. She says in her book that she told the police that the security guard who had found Michelle should be the one looked at more closely. And the police had actually already suspected that security guard, and his name was Raymond Lee Jennings. And they just didn't think his story really added up. And he was later convicted of the murder. And it's not known if Sylvia's psychic reading had anything to do with it, or if the police even heard it and thought we already suspected him, we're on the right track. There could have been some confirmation bias there. We don't know. And I bring this up, and it sounds like a success. She said the security guard did it, and he was convicted. But Sylvia did not live to see the exoneration of that same security guard.
2016, prosecutors said that new evidence had come to light that made them unsure of Lee's guilt. And in 2017, a judge struck down the conviction with the support of the prosecution, and it was removed from his record. So he was no longer convicted of that charge.
I have seen prosecutors stand by convictions when there is DNA evidence to the contrary. If you got the prosecutor saying, we're unsure of his guilt, but then signs on releasing him, he's innocent. That is my basis for actual innocent if the prosecutor will admit it.
Yeah, and this poor man served 11 years in prison. Sylvia counted it as a win, but so did the prosecution for a while. Anyone wrongfully convicted, though, is injustice. It's not a win for anyone. It's not a win for the family because that's the wrong person. They shouldn't be in jail. And it's not a win for the person who's wrongly convicted either.
Exactly. And the next one I want to talk about, something that's a little different. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is because she got caught on broadcast with this one. This is the Sago mine explosion. I don't know if anyone remembers that. It was in 2006, and it was a coal mine in West Virginia that exploded. And Sylvia Browne was live on a radio show discussing it and giving her psychic readings about it. And it was reported that there were 13 trapped miners, and it was believed that based on some noises coming from the mine that they were alive, that they were still in there, they were alive, and they were signaling. And so as she's on this live radio show, she is saying, I've looked into the other world and they're still alive. I know they're still alive. But then she was informed later in that same broadcast that the news reports were wrong. They were incorrect, and they actually believed that the miners were dead. 12 of the 13 would be found dead. So she made a prediction after she heard an erroneous news report, and then all of a sudden she backs away from this. And I'm going to just quote her directly here. She goes, I wish I pulled the audio because it's something to listen to, but she's, I don't think there's anybody alive. Maybe one. How crazy for them to report they were alive when they weren't, when she's literally the one who reported it. And she followed up with, I just don't think they are alive. Then they had a pause and they just went to commercial. And when they came back live again, she must have talked to somebody. And she's, I can confirm, I do not believe they are alive. So imagine getting caught on live radio doing something like that. And that was back in 2006, but she just kept going like nothing happened.
Which is exactly what happened in the case of Sean Hornbeck, who was kidnapped at the age of 11 in 2002. While Sean had just been missing for 4 months, his parents asked Sylvia on Montel about his kidnapping. She said they were taken by a Hispanic man with long dreadlocks and that he was dead. She said his body would be found between 2 boulders in a wooded area 20 miles from their home. Search efforts followed this information. Tips came in from people who heard what she said and knew of an area that matched that description. So we'll fast forward to January 12th of 2007. The police were serving a warrant on a man named Michael Devlin in Kirkwood, Missouri, and they noticed that his pickup truck was parked in an apartment complex parking lot, matched the description of the truck that was reported in the abduction of a 13-year-old boy named Ben Ownby just 4 days before that.
When they entered the apartment looking for Ben, they did find him alive. But then they also found Sean Hornbeck, who had been kidnapped 4 years before. And so not only was Sean not dead, the kidnapper was a white man with short hair, so that's a major fail. But I think the real problem is that she told this mother, looked her in the face and said, your son is dead, And you can watch her head drop as she heard that news from this psychic who, at the time, she trusted. She didn't trust her for long, but she trusted her in that moment. And you have to wonder what Sylvia Browne was doing this for. Fame? Was she wanting ass pats? Like, how can you do that to somebody?
It's unconscionable. And she just proves over and over again how terrible of a person she is. For example, in spite of repeated claims that she never charged law enforcement or families of the missing or murdered for her assistance, Sean's parents reported to Anderson Cooper that they were only allowed to speak to Sylvia on the show, and if they wanted additional assistance, they could get it by paying her $700 for about 20 or 30 minutes of her time. And that's going to be a phone call. Sylvia denied that this happened, but you can decide what you think.
Yeah, do you believe Sean's parents or do you believe Sylvia Browne?
Right.
Sylvia Browne.
Get out.
Security. After Sean was found alive, Sylvia also issued an apology. It was more like, I'm sorry to the New York Daily News. She said, I'm terribly sorry that this happened, but I think my body of work stands by itself. I've broken case after case. And quote, I think it's just cruel to jump on this one case in which I was wrong. I said thousands of times, I'm not God.
Who doesn't love an I'm sorry, but nobody cared that she wasn't God. You don't have to be God to just have empathy for this family. And this was a pattern because in a very similar situation to Sean Hornbeck, the mother of Amanda Berry had gone on the Montel show to ask about her daughter. And so I can tell that people recognize the name. For those who don't know, in 2003, the day before her 17th birthday, Amanda Berry went missing, and her abductor, who we now know was Ariel Castro, had taken her and held her captive with 2 other women until she was able to escape in May of 2013. She saved herself, the 2 other women, and the child that had been born while they were held captive. In 2004, Amanda had been missing for just a year, and her mother, Luana, went on the Montel show, and Sylvia told her that Amanda was dead and that Amanda's last words were, "Goodbye, Mom, I love you." In 2006, Luana died of heart failure, believing her daughter was dead.
7 years later, we all learned that that wasn't true. Amanda was alive. Sylvia made a statement after Amanda was found and claimed that she is right more than she is wrong, but if ever there was a time to be grateful for being wrong, it's this time. She said her heart went out to Amanda, the other victims, and their families, but you'll notice there wasn't an I'm sorry or even, hey, apologies for causing you pain. But like with Sean Hornbeck, it was overall a kinder statement even without the apology.
It was, I think the backlash from her statement after Sean Hornbeck had her couch this one a little bit more kindly, but it was still not an apology. The person who did apologize, in all fairness, was Montel Williams. After Amanda Berry said that while she was in Ariel Castro's house, she saw that Montel segment. She watched her mom be told she was dead. And when that came out, Montel made a statement, and he apologized for that. Anything on his show had caused her additional pain with everything she had been through. And I think this really gives us a pretty good overview of some of the cases that Sylvia Browne really caused damage and harm to families. There's a long list of other predictions, world events, elections, technology, all other things that the Skeptical Inquirer has debunked that Sylvia Browne had been wrong about. We'd be here all day. We wanted to keep going. But we do have to do just one more true crime case because this one really left me shaking my head.
Me too. Linda McClelland disappeared while visiting her daughter's house in July of 2000. Her 2 daughters and her son-in-law, David Rapaski. I don't know. It's not like Gonzalez, so I don't know. David Rapaski appeared on
I didn't look it up.
David Rapaski appeared on the Montel show 2 years later, and Sylvia said that Linda was alive in a nursing home in Florida and that she'd been taken with a man whose initials was called MJ. This was some comfort to the family because there was some suspicion that Linda's boyfriend, who was reportedly not a great guy, had been responsible, but all inquiries to nursing homes in Florida, of course, yielded nothing.
So then in 2003, a man confessed to the police that he had actually helped his friend bury Linda's body. And the man he helped was David Rapaski. Linda's son-in-law. The information bore out when the man led the investigators to Linda's body, and the autopsy confirmed cause of death.
And we've already seen cases where Sylvia said someone was dead, but they were actually alive. I keep turning my phone, you guys. I'm so sorry. Well, this happens even when we're recording together, so I'm sorry. Good Lord. Charlie, can you just pick it up for me because I lost my place?
Okay, I'll pick it up. We have plenty of cases where she said someone was dead when they were alive, vice versa. And in this one, what shocked me about this specific case is she had the killer in front of her, asking her what happened, where the person was, and she did not pick up on anything. I think that really illustrates her powers.
Towards the end of her life, Sylvia all but stopped doing interviews. She stopped talking to people. As the internet grew, so did everyone's ability to check on her facts, right? So that made it a lot more difficult for her to get away with the things that she was getting away with, for sure.
Yeah, I do not think it's a coincidence that she stopped doing interviews as the internet got bigger and bigger. That her saving grace was really that nobody could fact check her. And I do one last prediction that she got wrong was about her own death. Now, she had always claimed that she could see things for other people, but God never gives a psychic the ability to see things for themselves. They have to go through life the same as anyone else. However, she went on Larry King Live and decided that's not true anymore and predicted that she would die at the age of 88.
But because she qualified it and said that she couldn't know her own future, we can give her this one because she obviously didn't and died at 77.
So close. So one of the things that really drew me into this when I started reading her memoir, because I already knew she was a fraud, I'd already read that stuff, and I'm like, I want to read it from her words, was her memoir shows how much she absolutely adored her children and her grandchildren. She raised a child that wasn't her own, who needed a home. Her memoir almost looks like my Facebook page where it's just line after line about how amazing my kids are and I'm just so lucky, #blessed. That's her memoir. And I thought, how could someone just be so narrow-minded and blinded by things that she could not see, that Amanda Berry's mom, that Sean Hornback's mom, that they had those same feelings for their kids and that she could just stare them in the face and lie to them to be on Montel. Montel. It's not Oprah. Okay, I love Montel. Except for this.
This is a common thing that Charlie and I do on our show, Crime Lines and Consequences, is we look a little bit beyond the case. Yes, we cover the case and we talk about it, but we want to look at these kind of things that intersect with true crime, whether it be ethics, whether it be psychics, whether it be social media, whether that's a positive or negative impact. In my opinion, I definitely have a hard time with psychics getting involved in these types of cases. I know that sometimes families are desperate. I know that sometimes maybe even law enforcement is desperate for answers. Maybe there's pressure that's being put on them to solve a case. But every time I've seen cases and looked into cases where there are psychics involved, it's always a wild goose chase for law enforcement. It's a waste of their resources. It's a waste of their time. And families get their hopes up and they want to believe that they're getting the right answers. And I just think it's truly disgusting to do that to people. It's truly disgusting to exploit the pain and the trauma of somebody and the vulnerability of them for your own financial gain. And I feel like people like that really don't deserve to have a platform. They shouldn't be taken seriously and they shouldn't be listened to.
And it's not just psychics. So if you talk to a lot of families, you learn there are people who are private investigators out there who also will basically take the money of a missing person's family or a murdered person's family and do pretty much no work and say, oh, I used up the money you gave me sitting here doing nothing, so I need $10,000 more. And families have been built. So maybe next year we'll do the private investigator. We're gonna need 2 sessions for that, Whitney, if we cover bad private investigators. So it's not just about psychics. It's about people who are preying on vulnerable families.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you for coming to our live show. We are Crime Lines and Consequences. We only have 6 actual podcast episodes. So
7 now.
7 now. Thank you for coming. Number 7, check. If anyone has any questions, we can stay for questions, but I don't know if there's any questions.
Follow us on social media. Check out Crime Lines and Consequences wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And if you want to chat with us, we'll be around. Thank you.